Public-private partnerships. Hello, my name is Tommy White, and I'm an executive in residence and co-director of the AU Entrepreneurship Incubator at the Kogod School of Business. I'm also co-founder and former CEO of the Institute for Public-Private Partnerships, now owned by Tetra Tech. I have a couple of sessions here. We're going to talk about public-private partnerships. In part one, we're going to talk about the introduction to public-private partnerships. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. What are public-private partnerships? Why are they so important today? As well as look at some applicable sectors. In part two, we'll look at how you actually structure public-private partnerships, look at some case examples. We'll go through an overall model, look at some structures, some examples, and then also talk a little bit about prospects for new MBAs. So real quickly, my background. First and foremost, I've done my MBA at the Kogod School of Business. I graduated in 1995 in marketing, so I'm a proud graduate of Kogod. It really helped me in what I was doing in terms of starting up my company and my organization called the Institute for Public-Private Partnerships. We were founded in 1994 with a main focus on providing consultancy and training to the areas of public-private partnership modeling and development. So we did a lot of work with governments around the world on policy development, programming, guidelines. We did some deal structuring and actually putting together some of the actual PPP transactions. Been involved with regulation development that goes along with it. And we worked in many different sectors, from water, telecommunications, energy, transportation, urban renewal. And the nice thing for me is we were acquired in 2008 by a group called Tetra Tech. Tetra Tech bought us in 2008, and they are a leading provider of consultancy, engineering, and technical services worldwide. Their key focus is in water and renewable energy. They're a large company, publicly traded, over 4,000 employees with $1.7 billion in annual revenue. So why is this important? Well, one of the key things that I'm very proud of and what I've been involved with in the field of public-private partnerships is that we were really one of the pioneering organizations to be involved in this. Going back to 1994, which is many years ago, we began this idea of what we mean by public-private partnership development. And one of the things that I'm probably most proud of is that every government around the world today, from national government to local government to state governments, have all adopted this type of methodology as part of their sustainable development programming. So we're really excited to have done that and to be a part of that. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's talk about what public-private partnerships are. Well, there's three main players that are involved with a PPP model. The first and foremost is, of course, the public sector. The second is the private sector, and I call this the for-profit sector. And then the third, the NGO, non-governmental organization, or nonprofit sector. And what's really important about this in these three different sectors of how they come together is really looking at ways to leverage the resources of the public sector, of the private sector, of the nonprofit sector, to come together to really address problems and hopefully find out really innovative solutions in the times of changes that we have going on today. PPPs look at a variety of economic issues, social issue, infrastructure problems that are out there, and we'll talk about some of these sectors here in just a minute. So why do we need PPPs? Why do we need public-private partnerships? Why do we need to look at alternative ways to provide service deliveries? Well, first and foremost is a market failure. In a lot of areas where public-private partnerships are being successful and thriving is places where there really isn't a competitive market. And without that, you really need to think about how we can leverage different resources from government, from the public-private sector, and from the NGO sector. Second, there's limited government budgets, and they have competing priorities. Governments have budgets, have monetary requirements and restrictions that they have to work under. And so when they run out of that money or they decide what the priorities are, other areas that may need investment or activities involved simply don't have the funds to do that. And that's where public-private partnership models can come into play. Third, there's a lot of demand for services in the public-private partnership areas, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. But because of this large demand and the inability of government to be able to finance these on their own, they're looking for creative ways to do that. It also allows for a lot of flexibility in service delivery. If you can have different ways that government can provide services, and PPP models is just one of those, it really enhances their way to provide different services. Also increases opportunities for innovations. If we can leverage the resources of government, of the private sector, of the NGO sectors, and do what they do best and bring them together, we can really create some new ideas and generate some new innovation in fields that are often in need of having that particular innovation. Finally, they can increase the opportunity for scale of service delivery. If they really can grow and develop and expand what they're doing, then this is a great way to have this particular model to do this. So what exactly is a public-private partnership? Well, here's one definition. It is a long-term agreement between a government entity and a private or nonprofit company for the provision of a public service with appropriate risk allocation among the parties. So a real key thing here is it's about agreements. It's about working together between the different agencies, but understanding how we think and view risk and how risk is allocated among the different parties as part of a particular public-private partnership project or program. Some important pieces to this. First and foremost, the company must generally make an investment in the public-private partnership venture activity. They've got to play a role in this. They've got to participate in this particular activity. The government also must contribute, and they must contribute funds as part of this process, either through budget allocations of money that they actually have to give to the entities, maybe through loans that they may have or guarantees, land grants, rights of ways, things like that could help facilitate a public-private partnership to actually take place. The private company receives a revenue stream, and this is real important that there is revenue streams associated with this. Maybe it comes from government allocation and budget money that's available, or from user charges, or maybe some combination thereof. And a lot of public-private partnership programs and projects that are out there really have this hybrid between the two. Sometimes the agreements go on into perpetuity, meaning forever. Other time there's an end game to it. Maybe it's a 2-year project or a 5-year. For some of the larger scale investment projects like concession agreements and build, operate, own, build, operate transfers, those may last 20 to 30 years in terms of the actual agreement that goes on. How do we make public-private partnerships work? Well, what's really important here is to institutionalize this process into government, to make this successful and to get individuals and the stakeholders to really believe this is a successful model. We have to think about how we can institutionalize this process. We can do this at the federal level, state level, local level. It doesn't matter. In fact, in many countries, they do it at all 3 of these particular levels. So let's look at some of the issues that are important. First and foremost, a PPP unit or office can serve as a one-stop shop, where everybody can go to as a place to go to learn about the public-private partnership program that a particular government may have. They can be a major role in developing policies and procedures for public-private partnerships to actually implement and take place. They can help identify pipelines of projects, and they can be the ones to actually source project ideas and be the home for where people can go to actually see where project opportunities may be. A PPP unit can conduct pre-feasibility studies where they actually go out and do some of the initial work and initial legwork, maybe in technical feasibility or environmental feasibility or financial feasibility to go into a particular project. They can conduct what we call public sector comparator analysis. In many governments, people want to know, well, what if the public sector just did this particular project versus involving the private sector? So they'll do a comparator analysis. What would it be for the public sector to do it versus involving the private sector? Coordinate financing. A lot of these projects have very intensive financing components to it, and so this unit can be the major player in actually coordinating the different financing that may go into a PPP. Oversee the procurement. Transparency is a very important part of this process, and so there's often a bidding process that goes along for project development, project implementation, project management, and so they can be part of that process. They can provide information to the public and various stakeholders, going back to this one-stop shop idea where they can oversee and provide all the information that's needed to the public at large or to the various stakeholders involved with the programming. There are lots of examples of public-private partnerships around the world. For example, the Federal Highway Administration here in the United States has a PPP program in the highway area. VDOT, which is the Virginia Department of Transportation, has an Office of Transportation PPPs. China has a Center for Public-Private Partnerships that's housed at the highest levels of government. Malaysia, Philippines both have what we call PPP units. India has a PPP unit in the Ministry of Finance at the very highest level of governments, but virtually all of the state governments also within India have their own public-private partnership units also. There's Partnership BC, which is part of the United Kingdom. And finally, South Africa, as another example, has what's called a PPP unit. These all serve as this one-stop shop for managing their public-private partnership programs and projects. So where can we apply these particular models? Well, there's lots and lots of different sectors in which we can do this in. First, of course, highways and tolls is something that many of you are familiar with and have seen how the public-private partnership model is being implemented. There's solid waste and recycling distribution here. There's electricity transmission lines as a way to, another area you can apply PPP models to. There's renewable energy such as solar. Wind is certainly another big area for public-private partnerships. Urban markets is another place where the PPP models can be developed, where maybe the government provides the land for the particular unit, maybe even helps build the overall facility, and private companies come in and provide food and other retail services. Healthcare industry, education, wastewater treatment, electric cars, and urban renewal. So lots and lots of different sectors in which public-private partnerships can be applied. And if you look at these are all really big, important areas that are really important engines for economic development and growth for a particular country. So what are some of the key issues for public-private partnership modeling? Well, first, we have to understand that there's a changing role of government. And in many governments around the world, the government has been responsible for delivering many of these services. And now we have to start to think about it a little bit differently, from actually implementing these services to actually monitoring and managing or regulating these particular services. Second is understanding a value for money proposition. You know, public-private partnerships are not inherently more efficient or effective than traditional government procurements, nor are they less costly. You know, they may be more expensive. So you really have to step back and say, are we going after something that's about a least cost proposal, or are we looking for value for money? And that's a different analysis, a different way to look at particular projects. Willingness to pay. You know, with public-private partnerships, we begin to move away from tax-supported projects in which distribute subsidies are spread out from many different players to an investment of fee-for-service, where we actually pay for what we're doing. And so are consumers willing to pay for a particular service? Think of toll roads as a particular example of that. The private sector has to make a profit, okay? They're in it for a business, they're in it to make money. And so often a big stumbling block for government officials and even the public at large is to say, why does the private sector have to make money? Well, they're in it for a profit motive. So, you know, we think about sectors like water, maybe education, where we consider those sectors in many places as free. Well, they're not free. They are supported by tax dollars. But within the private sector, maybe we continue with that particular payment process, or we begin to think about other models of fee-for-service to go along with it. Another important part for the private sector is balancing of risk and rewards. And you look at public-private partnership projects, and there's a lot of risk to them. You can't just take a toll road that you built and pick it up and move it somewhere else. It just doesn't happen. You can't build an energy facility and pick it up and move it somewhere else. So there's a lot of risk that goes into it in terms of revenue streams and profitability that comes with that. And again, finally, PPPs are about financial rewards for investors. You know, and this is the whole project finance part of a public-private partnership model. Investors invest in this because they want a specific return to come with their particular investment. So some takeaways here to finish up part one. Public-private partnership models will be absolutely critical for economic development going forward. For example, right now the world has a $1.5 trillion annual deficit in infrastructure investment. This is expected to be $5 trillion by the year 2020. That is a huge amount of money. That's a huge amount of deficit that's out there right now. Huge amount of opportunities to participate. Who's going to pay for it? You know, and these are important sectors, you know, so think about this. If we have power outages or ports that take weeks to move ships in and out, rails that break down, how are we ever going to get our goods to market? So that's why public-private partners can play this important role to be an enabler to actually develop infrastructure in this particular area. PPPs are not a panacea, but one tool that governments have to finance economic activities. Government has lots of tools that they can pull from. This is just one of those. They are not inexpensive. You know, and as a consumer, we're going to have to get used to more user pay models. It really is the wave of the future. Thank you very much, and that ends part one.